For some, it's the person who cries with you when you're in pain or betrayed, who covers you with a blanket and kisses your forehead when you're feeling unwell, who is always there even from a distance. The one who believes you're still a child and in need of care, even if it's not true. But for some, it's the most terrifying and dangerous person. Placer County, California, 1984. Early in the morning around 4:30 a.m., Mabel Harrison, driving through the Squaw Valley forest, noticed a neglected campfire near the road. Stopping her car and walking a few meters to the fire, Mabel saw a human hand engulfed in flames, and then, like a puzzle, a horrifying scene unfolded before her eyes. A girl's body lay in the fire. Mabel reported her terrifying find to 911. Patrol officers were immediately dispatched to the scene. The fire was still burning. The body lay in the pit 7 meters from the road. Most of the body was burned, and the victim's clothes had incinerated. Later, forensic experts determined that the victim had been doused with gasoline. She was burned almost beyond recognition, but the left side of her face and back did not burn because they were against the ground. Some of her decomposed belongings and diaper remnants were found around her remains. This led the police to worry that she might have had a missing child who could be in danger. Residue of black duct tape was found on her cheeks, around her mouth, on her lips, and near her wrists. There was a long scar on her back, as if from a knife. The autopsy revealed that she was alive when she was set on fire. The police couldn't identify the victim. She didn't match anyone reported missing. A composite sketch of the unknown victim was created, but no one could identify her. The victim was given the name Jane Doe, number 4884. The police believed a young mother with a child had been abducted, disposed of in a sophisticated and cruel manner, hinting at a local serial killer. 1 year later, Elmer Barber and his wife, camp caretakers in Martis Creek Camp near Truckee, California, discovered a cardboard box during their morning rounds. Thinking it was just roadside litter, Elmer went to pick it up and found the body of a girl inside. Her hands and feet were tied with ropes. The remains of the unknown girl were too decomposed to determine the cause of death. The only distinguishing feature experts found on her remains was chipped front teeth. No one reported the disappearance of this young woman, so her case was closed. She became known as Jane Doe number 660785. Her death was attributed to serial killer Benjamin Herbert Boyle. However, the circumstances of the first Jane Doe's murder remained a mystery. The same coroner conducted autopsies on Jane Doe found in the fire and Jane Doe from the box. He didn't establish a connection between the victims, but there was a blood connection. On October 27, 1993, 9 years later, 23-year-old Terry Knorr called the sheriff's office in Nevada County, California. She told the operator that she had called all local authorities, telling them the same thing, but they didn't believe her and dismissed her as crazy due to the story she was telling. Terry told the operator that she knew who the 2 victims were. Now she was afraid for her life, terrified that she might be next. This time she was instructed to contact the Placer County Sheriff's Department, which she did. Terry Knorr called the department and said she had to tell her horrifying story, a story that no one had believed for many years. Investigators flew to Salt Lake City to meet Terry Knorr. Now Terry sits in front of investigators Ron Perea and John Fitzgerald, who are ready to hear her story to the end. Given that she has already provided details that only someone who knew the victims could know, the police are even prepared to believe her. But it won't be easy. Terry ran away from home when she was 15. Living on the streets, grappling with mental health issues and addiction, she frequently broke the law. Every time she got arrested, she would tell the police about the horror of her childhood, but no one believed her, not even her state-mandated therapist. The 2 murdered girls were her older sisters, Susan and Sheila Knorr. Their mother, Theresa Knorr, was the killer. Let's start telling this unbelievable story from the beginning, with the biography of a multi-child mother who turned out to be a monster. Theresa Cross was born on March 14, 1946, to Jim and Sunny Gay Cross in Sacramento, California. Theresa was the younger of 2 daughters born to this couple, and Sunny also had a son and daughter from a previous marriage. Jim worked as an assistant cheesemaker in Sacramento, while Sonny worked at Essex Lander Company, operating a pencil-making machine. With their savings, the Cross family bought a larger house in nearby Rio Linda. However, in 1958, their family happiness came to a tragic end. Jim was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and after an unsuccessful brain surgery, he was forced to remain unemployed. Sonny did everything she could to support the family until March 2, 1961, when she suffered a massive heart attack. Theresa, a few days before her 15th birthday, was with her mother on the day her heart gave out. She held her mother in her arms when she died, losing the person she was closest to. This tragic moment deeply affected the child's psyche. She experienced a severe depressive episode as a result of the early loss, leading to borderline personality disorder. This likely shaped the behavioral pattern that we'll discuss further. Individuals with borderline personality disorder often use sex as a means of attracting and retaining people in their lives, exploiting them through such behavior. A year after losing her mother, Theresa dropped out of school, got married at 16, and became pregnant. The next summer, she gave birth to her first child, Howard Sanders. She thought she now had the stability she lacked after losing her loved one. Her husband, 21-year-old Cliff Sanders, was an agricultural worker from the rural community of Galt, California. Galt is a small town in Sacramento County, resembling a little western town, where many residents wear cowboy boots. The marriage quickly fell apart because Theresa was excessively jealous of her husband, accusing him of infidelity no matter where he went or who he talked to. She became obsessed with control, monitoring him to ensure he wasn't meeting other women. The couple often fought, with Theresa claiming her husband abused alcohol. The following spring, she became pregnant again. Theresa frequently flew into fits of rage, seemingly unpredictable triggers setting her off. Her husband Cliff couldn't handle such a tense life, constantly accused of infidelity. He had enough and told Theresa he was done, he was leaving. Pregnant Theresa screamed, cried, and begged him to stay. That's when Cliff relented. On July 6, 1964, they argued again. Cliff, once again, declared that he was leaving. Theresa took out her rifle, aimed it at her husband, and shot him. The bullet hit him in the heart, killing him instantly. On August 30, 1964, Theresa was tried for murder. Her lawyers argued it was self-defense, portraying her as a real victim suffering endless humiliation and beatings. Poor Theresa, pregnant with her second child, as many believed. On September 22, 1964, the jury rendered a verdict, not guilty. Not only was she found not guilty, but the jury also felt sorry for her, hugging her and saying, "Poor thing. Thank God you escaped from the clutches of that horrible monster." But everything was not as it seemed. After the trial, Theresa started new relationships. She began using every man who entered her life either as a nanny for her children or for financial support. When she got tired of them, she moved on to another. On March 13, 1965, Theresa gave birth to her second child, Sheila. At this point in her life, she felt trapped because of the children, so she left her little ones with strangers to have the freedom to do what she really wanted, have fun, enjoy herself, and revel in her youth. Theresa became pregnant for the third time and married Marine Robert Knorr on July 9, 1966, the father of her third child. In 1966, she gave birth to Susan, followed by two more children, William in 1967 and Robert Jr. in 1968. Robert adopted and legally changed the last name of Howard and Sheila to Knorr. 5 children and another marriage falling apart. Just like her first marriage, Theresa's relationship with Robert was full of arguments fueled by alcohol and accusations of infidelity. Individuals with borderline personality disorder don't learn from their own experiences, repeating the same chaotic and unstable relationships. Theresa's jealousy and constant accusations of infidelity led Robert to break off the relationship. He left in 1969, and they divorced in 1970. On August 5, 1970, just 2 months after divorcing Robert, Theresa, who was around 25 years old at the time, gave birth to her sixth child, a girl she named Theresa or Terry Marie. Robert wanted to maintain contact with his children, but Theresa forbade it. At that time, there were no laws like today that protect a father's rights. As a result, Robert never saw his children again, as Theresa wished. She erased him from her life and the lives of her children. Theresa remarried twice, first to railroad worker Ron Pulliam and then to editor Chester Harris. Both marriages ended in divorce. Ron Pulliam left Theresa because she would roam the streets at night, leaving him alone with the children. He was also convinced she was having an affair. Theresa parted ways with Chester Harris because Harris and her daughter Susan became close. Theresa was jealous and filed for divorce in November 1976. Her fourth and final marriage lasted just over 2 months. After the last divorce, her mental and physical health began to deteriorate. Her neuroses intensified, and Theresa drank heavily. She gained weight, and paranoid delusions set in. She withdrew her children from school, disconnected the home phone, and kept the children indoors. Always controlling, Theresa became more aggressive and unpredictable. In one moment, she could be calm, and in the next, her cheeks would flush with anger, tearing into fits of rage. "You never know what to expect from her," Terry said. She accused her children of things they didn't do. For example, one time Theresa got drunk and decided she wanted to pluck out her eyebrows. When she woke up the next morning sober, she realized her eyebrows and eyelashes were completely gone. She then called all 3 of her daughters into her bedroom and punished them, thinking her daughters wanted to steal her beauty. Physical punishment was very frequent. Terry described the weapon her mother used, a board almost a meter long with duct tape wrapped around one end as a handle. Theresa made her other children hold their sibling while the punishment lasted. She burned her children with cigarettes, made them do strenuous work in the heat, deprived them of sleep, and threw knives at them as a game. Once, she locked 8-year-old Terry in the freezer for a made-up crime, while Howard sat on the freezer to prevent Terry from getting out. Terry mentioned that her mother wasn't always so bad. For instance, she once pawned her diamond ring to buy Terry new clothes and shoes. She took the children to the mountains, organized celebrations. However, these were isolated incidents. Theresa worked, helping care for the sick and elderly in local nursing homes and hospitals. People with borderline personality disorders can appear normal in society. They can behave as though they are good mothers, good employees, good people. Over time, things got worse. Theresa's anger was mostly directed at her older daughters. Terry said her mother hated women. She disliked her older daughters because they were young women. She aged, stopped coloring her hair, and gained weight. She began to envy her daughters because they were young and attractive. People with borderline personality disorders can be dangerous because their impulsivity, chaotic behavior, and predisposition to violence can take them far. At some point, Theresa became convinced that Susan was a witch who had cast a spell on her, causing her to gain weight. So, in addition to the physical abuse, Theresa began force-feeding Susan to make her gain weight. Theresa made huge portions of macaroni and cheese, adding pieces of bacon, and made Susan eat it all. If Susan refused, Theresa fed her with a spoon. Life for Theresa's sons was not as terrible. According to Terry, she loved her sons, and as they grew older, she stopped mistreating them altogether. She made them hold their sisters and follow other instructions. The boys were taught to do everything their mother wanted, and they did it all. For them, their sisters turned into lifeless objects, so they didn't feel guilty since, in their opinion, they weren't doing anything wrong. Terry mentioned that her mother allowed the boys to work after school and even hang out with friends, but the girls were kept confined. Children were led to believe that their lifestyle was normal. People raised in years of cruelty remained silent about what was happening in their home. No one reported the cruelty of the mother because no one hoped that they could be helped. After all, the children thought everyone lived that way. Theresa's insanity escalated with each passing day due to heavy alcohol consumption. Because of excessive drinking, Theresa developed a psychotic disorder in which she constantly began to have delusions about events happening around her. Terry shared that her mother wanted more money and forced Susan and Sheila into prostitution. As Susan grew older, she realized that what her mother was doing wasn't normal parenting. One day, Susan escaped from home, returning with a car full of friends to retrieve her clothes and belongings. Howard was home at the time and got into a fight with one of the guys. The others got scared and left Susan behind. After that, Susan left home several more times. In 1980, Sacramento police detained 15-year-old Susan Knorr on suspicion of running away from home and engaging in prostitution. She begged the police not to return her home and detailed the violence, but her mother convinced the police that her daughter was just a liar. Social workers questioned other children, but with their mother in the room. Intimidated, the children supported their mother and denied that she ever beat them. Theresa made Terry tell Child Protective Services that there was no violence in their family. Susan was returned under her mother's care. Theresa saw Susan's actions as betrayal. She handcuffed the girl under the dining table and gagged her. Theresa continued to beat her and subjected her to forced feeding. Robert and William participated in the beating. Susan became a captive, guarded by her brothers. This went on for about 2 years. Howard left his mother's home and started living separately. He never told anyone about what happened in his childhood home. In June 1983, 17-year-old Susan dared to rudely respond to her mother, after which Theresa started screaming uncontrollably at her daughter. Then Theresa took a .22 caliber pistol and shot Susan in the chest. Surprisingly, the bullet didn't hit any vital organs. Instead of calling for help, Theresa had Susan carried into the bathroom and placed her in the bathtub. There, Theresa handcuffed Susan to the soap dish. Theresa took care of Susan to help her recover. Theresa's sudden concern for her daughter's well-being reflected her instability. Theresa shot Susan and then began to save her, lacking the ability to foresee and understand the consequences of her actions. Terry said, "My mother was so blatantly contradictory. She played the role of a mother, but she also played the role of a tormentor. She would punish us, and the next day she could be kind and sweet." Terry was ordered to help take care of her sister. Theresa kept Susan in the bathtub for about a month, trying to cure her. And Susan got better. She ended up under the table again. Every day she begged her mother to let her go, promising not to tell anyone what happened. Theresa eventually softened, but with one condition: Susan had to let her mother remove the bullet from her body, which was still inside, so there would be no evidence that Susan could use against her in the future. Susan agreed. This was the only way to escape this madness. In July 1984, Theresa conducted an operation to remove evidence of her cruelty. She ordered Susan to drink a bottle of whiskey and eat antipsychotic drugs. Susan lost consciousness. During the operation, Terry was by her mother's side, acting as an assistant surgeon. Theresa cut into her daughter's back and pulled out the bullet. After the operation was completed, Theresa flushed the bullet down the toilet. Susan woke up in excruciating pain. Theresa gave her ibuprofen and antibiotics. The girl became lethargic, her eyes turned yellow, and eventually, she couldn't control bowel movements. Susan was put in diapers. Susan became delirious from infection and pain and soon fell into a coma. Theresa insisted that Susan was just pretending and left her on the kitchen floor, advising the other children to ignore the pretender. When Susan's body turned yellow from sepsis and jaundice, Theresa claimed that it was evidence that Susan was possessed by a demon. And she believed that the only way to expel the demon was through fire. Theresa bound Susan's wrists and taped her mouth shut. She ordered her sons to load their sister into the car's trunk. The family drove towards the mountainous wooded areas of Lake Tahoe. Susan was still alive but extremely weak. She was unconscious but still breathing. They placed her by the roadside along with all her belongings, including diapers. Theresa ordered her sons to pour gasoline over everything, including Susan. Then William lit a match, and they drove away, leaving Susan's body burning behind them. William and Robert could participate in burning Susan because, by that time, they had become desensitized to violence. In their minds, they had simply disposed of unwanted trash, not a person, not their sister. Terry Knorr hoped that the violence would stop, at least for a while. But her mother was now convinced that the devil was with them, that it had left Susan's lifeless body and entered another. Theresa's rage was now focused on Sheila. As with Susan, Theresa began to force-feed Sheila violently. Once, she shoved a spoon into Sheila's mouth with such force that it damaged 2 of her front teeth. Theresa accused Sheila of contracting a venereal disease and passing it to her through the toilet seat. As punishment, Sheila was now under the table. Sheila was forbidden from using the toilet and bathroom. Theresa continued to beat Sheila, demanding that she confess to infecting her mother with a venereal disease. William and Robert participated in the punishment. In a fit of anger, Theresa tied her daughter up and stuffed her into the pantry. The children were strictly ordered not to open the door. Sheila was confined in a tiny closet. She had nowhere to sit or lie down. Theresa left her there for several weeks without food and water. When Sheila cried and begged to be released, Theresa simply turned on the television to drown out her cries. Theresa was near the pantry door. But sometimes she would leave, and Terry managed to give her sister a little water. Theresa never noticed what Terry was doing, otherwise, she probably would have considered it betrayal. Sheila constantly muttered about rising to the light. Then she fell silent. When Theresa finally opened the pantry door, Sheila's decomposing body fell out. Robert brought the largest box he could find from the movie theater where he worked, a popcorn box. They wrapped Sheila's remains in bedding and stuffed her into the box, then loaded it into the car's trunk. Terry was ordered to clean the pantry where her sister died. Meanwhile, Theresa and her sons once again headed to Lake Tahoe to burn Sheila's remains, just as they did with Susan. They stopped on the road, but before they could retrieve the box with Sheila's body, a police officer approached them. Theresa managed to deflect any suspicions, claiming that her boys needed to use the restroom. The police officer told them to keep going. Theresa decided to change the route, so they went to Martyrs Creek Lake and dumped the box with Sheila's remains in the bushes. The encounter with the police scared them, and they didn't burn the box for fear of being seen. The police didn't establish any connection between the 2 murders. The victims' identities remained a mystery to them until Terry Knorr came forward 9 years later. After Sheila's death, Theresa became an even greater paranoid because, in her mind, evidence related to her daughter's death remained in that pantry. As a result, she essentially ordered Terry to douse the place with a flammable liquid and then set it on fire. The family moved to a motel. Terry, who was 15 at the time, was afraid that she would become her mother's next victim. She recalled, "I still pale, remembering the coldness in my mother's voice." One evening, when I came to wish her good night, with half-closed eyes, she sat in a deep chair and gestured for me to come closer. In her drunken stupor, Theresa howled at her trembling but resilient daughter. Terry recounted, she had 2 guns. That evening she took out an old cowboy pistol with a bone handle. Aiming the gun at me, she said, "I shot once, and I can do it again." Soon after, Terry escaped. She did what she had to do to survive. She knew that otherwise, she could very well have been the next victim, and most likely, that's exactly what would have happened. Friends offered Terry a safe haven. Robert lived with his mother for a while, and William almost immediately moved in with his girlfriend. Terry's memories stunned the police. They couldn't even fathom the level of cruelty she described. However, the details she provided too accurately matched the crime scenes to be disbelieved. Investigators determined that the box used to dispose of Sheila was taken from a local movie theater. In employee records, they found a familiar name, Robert Knorr. The police contacted the forensic laboratory in Sacramento at the Department of Justice. Experts found fingerprints of William and Robert Knorr on the box itself, providing direct evidence of the presence of the 2 brothers at the crime scene. In November 1993, arrest warrants were issued for William, Robert, and Theresa Knorr. It turned out that Theresa and Robert Jr. had moved to Las Vegas together. Later, Theresa left Vegas for Salt Lake City. Robert was easily found. He was in a Nevada prison for shooting and killing a bartender during a robbery 2 years earlier. William lived and worked in Woodland, California. Initially, William denied his involvement in his sister's deaths. But eventually, he confessed. John Fitzgerald asked William why he didn't stop at some point and tell his mother to stop. William replied, "You don't know what it's like to live in the same house with my mother. You have no idea what it was like. I had to do what she wanted from me." The police constantly asked this question during the investigation: why didn't any of the children report it? All the children repeated over and over, "You don't know our mother, you can't defy her." In their childhood, they were convinced that such punishments and treatment applied to absolutely all children. And that Theresa, as they thought in their childhood, was a normal mother, though they were terrified of her. Charges of murdering their sisters Susan and Sheila were brought against William and Robert Knorr. The police headed to Salt Lake City, Utah, where Theresa was then living under her maiden name, taking care of an elderly woman. She was made up, wearing beautiful clothes, and had a beautiful wig. It seemed she was living quite well. Theresa Knorr faced charges of 2 first-degree murders. They needed to find jurors who could consider a case involving these 2 murders, taking into account the psychological abuse Robert and William endured in their childhood, even if not physically. In the courtroom, now grown men faced their mother, whom they hadn't seen for about 10 years. They were very afraid of her. Seeing her sons, Theresa went into a kind of hysterical trance, frightening the entire courtroom. So, William was sentenced to compulsory intensive psychiatric treatment. Robert pleaded guilty to being an accessory. He was sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment concurrently with the previous sentence, meaning he wasn't given additional years in prison. On October 17, 1995, Theresa Knorr was found guilty of the murders of 17-year-old Susan and 20-year-old Sheila. The charges were based on Terry's bold statements. Theresa Knorr herself offered no explanations. Her lawyer claimed she was remorseful and that during those times, she led a chaotic and insane life, abused alcohol, and had untreated mental illnesses. The judge told Knorr that it didn't excuse her. Her crimes were characterized by incredible cruelty. He sentenced Theresa to 2 consecutive life sentences. She won't be eligible for parole until 2027, when she'll be 81 years old. In court, Theresa's second husband had a message for her: "I hope you burn in hell for everything you did to my children." Currently, Theresa is serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. Robert completed his sentence and was released in 2013. Today, William is working, has a family, and enjoys what he calls a normal life. The only remaining daughter of Theresa, Terry, lived her entire life with a sense of guilt. Horrible nightmares tormented her throughout her conscious life. She said, "I just want my sisters to know that I had nothing to do with it, and I loved them." Later, she wrote, "No living soul should endure the insults my sisters and I faced from my mother and brothers. But people in this world are subjected to cruel treatment every day by those who are supposed to love them. The problem with these tormentors is that they make you feel guilty when they are guilty of everything." Analyzing these words, we hope that Terry eventually managed to shake off the sense of guilt. On December 8, 2011, Terry Knorr suffered a fatal heart attack. She was 41 years old.